He was the most famous man on Earth. A voice that crossed borders, a face recognized on every continent, a performer who seemed to defy gravity itself. For millions, Michael Jackson was not just an artist, he was a myth. But in 1993, that myth collided with something darker, an allegation that threatened to destroy everything he had built, and to rewrite how the world would remember him. Television cameras swarmed the gates of Neverland Ranch. Helicopters hovered overhead. News anchors, legal experts, and self-appointed commentators filled hours of airtime asking the same question: did Michael Jackson, the so-called king of pop, commit the unthinkable? On the surface, we saw what the cameras were allowed to see. Carefully worded statements. Lawyers in dark suits stepping up to microphones. Fans crying outside courthouses, holding up signs of support. Archival clips of a young Michael smiling, dancing, hugging children on stage, contrasted with headlines that screamed words like abuse, molestation, and scandal. But behind that wall of cameras, something else was happening. There were strategy rooms, conference calls, late-night meetings, crisis managers, and lawyers trying to control a narrative that was slipping further and further out of their hands. There were negotiations, investigations, and decisions made in private that would never be fully explained to the public. Decisions that would lead to a multi-million-dollar settlement. Decisions that, even today, fuel endless debate. Was it protection of innocence or protection of an image? In this documentary, we're going to step past the flashing bulbs and the media. We go in to slow down the story of the 1993 allegations and examine not just what the world was shown, but what Michael Jackson's team worked desperately to keep off camera. What did his advisors believe that the public did not see? Why were some documents sealed, some witnesses limited by confidentiality agreements, and some details kept strictly out of the spotlight? How did a global superstar's inner circle move, react, and sometimes collide as they tried to shield him from the most damaging accusations of his life? This is not a simple story of guilt or innocence. It is a story about power, image, fear, and the machinery that surrounds a celebrity at the top of the world when everything begins to fall apart, drawing on publicly available information, media reports, and later testimony. We'll reconstruct the crucial months of 1993, from the first allegation to the settlement that shocked the world, and ask, what was Michael Jackson's team really trying to hide from the cameras? To understand the shock of 1993, we need to remember who Michael Jackson was before the storm hit. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Michael was more than a pop star. He was a global cultural phenomenon. Thriller had changed music forever. Bad and Dangerous confirmed his dominance. His music videos were events. His live shows were spectacles that sold out stadiums in minutes. Corporations, charities, and global brands fought to be associated with him. He was, for many, the embodiment of talent, generosity, and childlike wonder. And that childlike image was not accidental. Michael often spoke about his lost childhood. Pushed into the spotlight as a little boy with the Jackson 5, he described his upbringing as strict, lonely, and controlled. As an adult, he built Neverland Ranch, a sprawling property with a private amusement park, a zoo, a train, and movie theaters. It was part home, part Fantasyland, designed, in his words, to be the childhood he never had. Children were a constant presence at Neverland. Sick children, disadvantaged children, fans invited to share in the magic. The press, at first, embraced this portrayal. Michael Jackson, the gentle superstar who loved children, who gave millions to charity, who opened his home to those less fortunate. His 1993 primetime interview with Oprah Winfrey, broadcast months before the allegations became public, reinforced this narrative. He was shy, soft-spoken, emotional. He appeared vulnerable and human. And then, later in 1993, came a story that shattered that carefully held image. A 13-year-old boy and his father came forward with allegations that Michael Jackson had sexually abused the child. Overnight, the narrative flipped. The same characteristics that had once inspired warmth, his closeness with children, sleepovers, shared beds, constant physical affection, were suddenly recast in a far more disturbing light. Police launched an investigation. Neverland Ranch and other properties were searched. According to news reports at the time, investigators took photographs, seized items, and began interviewing those who worked around Michael. The media frenzy intensified. Tabloids and mainstream outlets alike competed for every possible angle, every rumor, every unconfirmed anecdote. Inside Michael's world, his team went into crisis mode. Lawyers were hired, including high-profile names experienced in both criminal defense and high-stakes civil negotiations. Public relations specialists and crisis managers were brought in to handle the rapidly unfolding media disaster. Advisors debated how much Michael should say, how often he should appear in public, and whether he should continue his dangerous world tour. Some members of his team insisted that he stay visible and defiant. Others warned that any unscripted word could be used against him by prosecutors, the boy's family, or the press. The contradiction at the heart of the defense was clear. To protect his legal position, Michael had to stay quiet. But to protect his public image, silence could look like guilt. As the story spread globally, a second narrative emerged, one that Michael's supporters seized on. There were claims and counterclaims about money, motives, and possible extortion. Allegations surfaced in the media that the boy's father had spoken about financial gain. These claims were fiercely debated and never fully resolved in the court of public opinion. Different sides presented different versions of the same events, each one insisting that their version was the real one. For the public, one thing was clear. The Michael Jackson they thought they knew now existed in the shadow of an accusation that could never fully be unseen. Behind the scenes, his team faced a series of impossible choices. How far should they go to challenge the accuser's credibility? How much of Michael's private life should be exposed in order to defend him? And if they believed he was innocent, what was the best way to protect him in the courtroom, in the media, or in both? It was in this climate of panic, strategy, and fear that the decisions we will examine in this documentary were made. Decisions that, to this day, leave us asking, were they trying to protect an innocent man from a false allegation, or to contain a truth too dangerous to reach the cameras? As the 1993 investigation intensified, Michael Jackson's life became a battlefield fought on two fronts: the legal system and the court of public opinion. On the legal side, police and prosecutors were working to build a potential criminal case. That process included interviews, searches, and, notoriously, a body examination of Michael himself, as authorities looked for markings that could corroborate the boy's description. Those details were kept largely out of public view at the time, though leaks and reports hinted at what had taken place behind closed doors. On the media side, every new rumor was a headline. Michael's team understood something crucial. In high-profile cases, perception can shape reality. If the world decided early that he was guilty, it wouldn't matter what a courtroom might eventually say. So, they moved to shape the narrative carefully. Official statements described the allegations as lies and attempted extortion. Legal representatives argued that the accusers were motivated by money, not truth. Privately, some advisors urged Michael to appear on television and speak directly to the public, to repeat what he had already told friends and colleagues, that he denied any wrongdoing, that he saw his relationships with children as innocent, and that he believed he was being targeted because of his fame. But lawyers worried. Any emotional, unscripted interview could provide material for cross-examination. Anything he said could be twisted, taken out of context, or used to build a case against him. For weeks, this internal tension played out. The performer and Michael wanting to speak, the legal machine around him urging caution. During this period, one of the most powerful tools in his team's arsenal was control of access. Who got to speak? Who got close? Journalists were kept at a distance. Former employees who went to the tabloids were denounced by his camp as liars. Confidentiality agreements, NDAs, shaped what staff and insiders could say publicly. Behind every calm press conference, there were meetings about who should remain quiet, who could be trusted, and what would happen if damaging information leaked. Then came a decision that would change everything: the choice to settle the civil case. In early 1994, Michael Jackson's legal team reached a financial settlement with the boy's family, widely reported to be in the tens of millions of dollars. The precise terms were confidential, and remains so. The settlement did not include any admission of guilt. On paper, it was structured to allow both sides to end the litigation without conceding the truth of the other's claims. Michael's team publicly framed the settlement as a necessary step to protect his health, his career, and his sanity. They argued that the litigation had become a circus, that he was exhausted and under immense emotional strain, and that dragging the process out would not serve justice, only more headlines. But from the outside, many saw something else. Critics asked, if he was innocent, why not fight it in court? Did the settlement buy silence? Did it discourage further investigation? Supporters countered, wealthy people settle cases to avoid the uncertainty and brutality of trials. They pointed out that the criminal investigation was legally separate, and that civil settlements are not proof of guilt. Here is where the off-camera reality becomes crucial. According to reports and later commentary, the negotiations surrounding the settlement were intense and highly strategic. Lawyers were not just thinking about 1993. They were thinking about Michael Essentier, future upcoming albums, tours, endorsements, and the long-term value of his brand. A public trial would mean months of damaging testimony, the airing of private details, and a permanent stain on his image. Regardless of the verdict, for his team, the settlement was a way to stop the bleeding. For many members of the public, it was the moment they first doubted him, or, for others, the moment they decided he was being hunted for his money. What's important is not only the decision itself, but how it was managed. Key documents were sealed. The family agreed not to pursue the civil case further. Much of what had been alleged remained locked away, protected by legal agreements. Michael's team emphasized repeatedly that the settlement had no bearing on the separate criminal investigation, though some observers have argued that it complicated prosecutors' efforts and the willingness of witnesses to participate. What did Michael's team hide from the cameras? Not necessarily a single explosive secret, but a whole process. The fear in private meetings, the legal calculations, the weighing of image against principle, money against the possibility of vindication. What we saw was a finished statement. The case has been resolved. What we didn't see were the drafts, the arguments, and the nights of doubt that led up to it. The settlement ended the civil case, but it did not end the story. In the years that followed, the 1993 allegations became a permanent part of Michael Jackson's public identity. Every new project, every appearance, every charitable act came with an unspoken asterisk. For some, he remained a misunderstood genius. For others, he was forever tainted. Michael himself maintained his innocence until his death in 2009. He and his representatives repeatedly described the 1993 case as a shakedown, a calculated attempt to exploit his kindness and his wealth. In interviews and statements, he painted himself as a target, a man whose love for children had been twisted in two, something monstrous by a world obsessed with scandal. But the 1993 allegations did not vanish. In 2003, when Michael was charged in another separate case involving a different boy, prosecutors attempted to use aspects of the 1993 story to suggest a pattern of behavior. Old questions former employees and associates came forward with their own accounts, some defending him, some accusing him. In 2005, after a highly publicized trial, Michael Jackson was acquitted on all criminal charges in that later case. Yet acquittal did not erase the past. The 1993 allegations, the settlement, and the secrecy around many of the documents remained unresolved for the public. Over time, the story splintered into competing narratives, each with its own interpretation of what Michael's team had done in those crucial months. In one narrative, his team art protectors. They saw a sensitive, emotionally fragile artist being devoured by a ruthless media and opportunistic accusers. Their secrecy, their insistence on privacy, the NDAs and settlements, all of it, in this view, was an attempt to shield him from exploitation and prevent further harm. In another narrative, his team are gatekeepers of truth. They controlled access, secured confidentiality, and used legal maneuvers to keep disturbing allegations from ever being fully examined in public. In this version, the cameras never saw the full picture because they were never allowed to. The reality may lie somewhere in between. What we know, based on public records and reporting, is that immense pressure shaped every decision. The financial stakes were enormous. The emotional stakes were higher still. A wrong move could end a career, or send a man to prison, or irreparably damage the lives of the children and families involved. We also know that celebrity itself distorts everything around it. When a global icon is accused of a terrible crime, the truth must fight through a maze of money, lawyers, power, bias, and fandom. Some witnesses may stay silent out of fear. Others may come forward for attention or financial gain. Evidence can be interpreted and reinterpreted in 1,000 different ways by people who already believe they know the answer. Michael Jackson's team operated within that distortion field. They tried to manage the unmanageable, to fight a legal battle, a media war, and a psychological crisis all at the same time. They chose confidentiality over transparency. They chose settlement over trial. They chose, again and again, to limit what the cameras could see. Decades later, documentaries, books, and interviews continue to revisit 1993, each adding new pieces, new voices, new interpretations. Some emphasize accusers' experiences and argue that the patterns are too strong to ignore. Others highlight inconsistencies, motives, and the pressures surrounding high-profile accusations. What remains undeniable is that the 1993 allegations fundamentally altered the story of Michael Jackson. They forced the world to look at the gap between his public image, the gentle, soft-spoken man who adored children, and the private questions that will likely never be fully answered. This film does not claim to solve that mystery. Instead, it pulls back the curtain on the machinery behind a global scandal, the lawyers, the publicists, the crisis managers, and the choices made in quiet rooms, far from the camera's gaze. In the end, we are left with a haunting question. When truth, power, and image collide, can we ever really know what happened behind closed doors? Now, we turn the story over to you. You've seen how a single allegation in 1993 set off a chain reaction that changed Michael Jackson's life and legacy forever. You've walked through the public spectacle, the headlines, the press conferences, the settlement, and glimpsed the quieter world behind it. The legal strategies, the controlled statements, the decisions made to keep certain things away from the cameras. But what do you think? Do you believe Michael Jackson was an innocent man crushed by fame, media, hysteria, and the motives of others? Do you think his team's secrecy was a necessary defense in a world eager to destroy him? Or do you feel that those same walls of lawyers and PR may have kept us from seeing a more disturbing truth? Tell us in the comments. Share your perspective on the 1993 case, on the role of his team, and on how the media shaped what we remember. If you've changed your mind over the years in either direction, explain what made you see things differently. And as you comment, remember, these are real people's lives. Keep the conversation thoughtful, respectful, and open to nuance. If you've found this deep dive valuable, and you want more long-form investigations into the hidden stories behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep exploring complex cases like this, slowly, carefully, and with as much context as possible. Like the video, share it with someone who loves documentaries, and let's keep asking the hard questions together.